Hello, everyone. Happy Tuesday. We are here with a very special guest today, Judy Tsafrir. Did I say your name right, Judy?
You did?
Okay. Now, Judy and I met, I'm not even sure where, but we seem to hold a shared interest in kind of astrology and remedy of issues. Now, Judy's specialty is psychiatry, though. She is a psychiatrist who's also an astrologer. She wrote this book, Sacred Psychiatry. It looks like it won a Nautilus Book Award, so it must be good. And it says bridging the personal and transpersonal to transform health and consciousness. So, Judy, tell us a little bit about what you do as a psychiatrist. And you're not really a conventional psychiatrist.
No, just being an astrologer to begin with would make me like not a conventional psychiatrist because psychiatry has no kind of affinity to astrology, even though Hippocrates said that a physician who does not know astrology has no business calling themselves a physician. Um, but I have a holistic practice, so my book describes the kinds of things that I do in my practice. Um, And I wrote it because I wanted to share all of the ideas that I have that have developed over time as my practice morphed from being a fairly conventional psychoanalyst to incorporating all kinds of different holistic modalities into my practice, including astrology and shamanism and functional medicine and energy healing and nervous system regulation and a lot of attention to nutrition. Um, so people come to see me who want to get off medications rather than be put on medications. I'm usually not the first stop. They're usually fairly disenchanted with conventional psychiatry as it's practiced, which is similar to the paradigm in medicine as well, where you just identify symptoms and thereby create a diagnosis, and then there's an algorithm of which pharmaceutical to prescribe or procedure to do surgery. So, like, that's not the paradigm that I ascribe to.
Oh, wait, you didn't start off as an astrologer and a psychiatrist. You started off as a psychiatrist solely.
I started off as a psychiatrist solely, but I did training in psychoanalysis, so that already makes me a kind of unusual psychiatrist because my practice was mostly like the talking cure. Um, it wasn't like prescribing medications, even though I would, occasionally prescribe, but mostly people came to see me to talk, and psychoanalysis is typically an intensive kind of talking where people come multiple times a week to talk about things and to not just kind of get support, but sort of look at things in a deeper way.
Interesting. Do you believe that every person can get off meds, or do some charts or people need meds?
Well, it would be pretty hard to say that every person could get off of meds, but um, I think like I once supervised a resident who was funny. He said, "The people who need to take medication won't take it, and those who don't need to take it will." Like medications are prescribed, so there's such a low bar for prescribing. Um, there could be so much done with lifestyle and nutrition um, and nervous system regulation before reaching for the prescription pad. And those medicines are not a free lunch. They often have side effects, and people can have a really hard time getting off of them. Um, so, I mean, like if a person is sort of relentlessly suicidal or homicidal or, you know, just there doesn't seem to be any kind of way to help them from harming themselves or harming someone else, then, maybe then they do need to be on medications. And, like there's certain patients like who really have frank bipolar disorder where I haven't seen it go well if they've had multiple episodes of mania and they're not on some kind of mood stabilizer, like let's say lithium. But very frequently, those patients are not just on a mood stabilizer, but they're also on an antipsychotic and an anti-anxiety medicine and something for attentional problems. And it's just such the polypharmacy is so common and so toxic, really.
Hmm, interesting. Yeah, okay, okay. So, well, I have to say, do you think that psychiatry, or well, do you think astrologers know more about bipolarism than most mainstream psychologists because of our attention to transits and being able to track manias and things?
I really don't know, Andrea. I don't know the answer to that. I think psychiatrists often misdiagnose mania. They think it's, like, I mean, psychiatric diagnosis is in a way a diagnosis of exclusion. So, like, if you don't have like another reason for something, then you call it psychiatric. So, um, let's say a person has like a terrible sleep disorder, so they can't focus or concentrate. It's not right to say that they have attention deficit disorder. They have a problem paying attention because they're so tired. Um, and like the reason I'm starting to talk about that is because I think a lot of patients have histories of trauma, and they have sort of unintegrated parts of themselves and unintegrated self states that then start, become expressed because they're triggered in some kind of way. And it's not really like mania that is not related to something. It's like trauma that needs to be treated with some kind of treatment for trauma, not just giving them medications to suppress their mania or to stabilize their mood.
Mhm.
Yeah, I oh well I really want to talk about this sleep, where you were going with the sleep thing for a second, because it does seem to me, and actually I happen to be doing this training for work about like, kind of maximizing your potential. And what they concentrate on is your sleep, your diet, your fitness. And then like also like if you're taking caffeine or drugs or alcohol, like recreational drugs or alcohol.
Isn't
And
it like total common sense? Isn't it like total common sense? Like
yeah,
it's not like rocket science, but why don't psychiatrists talk with patients in detail about their diet? Why don't they talk with them about what kind of movement they're getting? Why don't they talk with them about getting early morning sunlight and fresh air? Like it doesn't make any sense. It's just
it seems in a way like the answers are too easy. And then or they're too hard because they take discipline,
It's
perhaps.
totally true. Like if somebody wants to work with me, like I'll spend quite a bit of time on the phone with them before we set up an initial consultation, me trying to assess their motivation, because it's totally different than just prescribing a pill to somebody. I said, are you willing to make changes to your diet? That is a huge thing to ask someone. It's very, very hard to change your diet. I've heard being said it's easier to change a person's religion than their diet. Like it's really hard.
Hmm.
And, like, are you willing to do a practice to help you learn to regulate and soothe your own nervous system? Because that is so essential. Like, so many cases of chronic complex illness where the person has like inflammation that's driving all of these symptoms could be treated with nervous system regulation if they could just calm down. But it really requires like skillful practice.
Well, I can attest to that because so I've a schizophrenia diagnosis and
Which is ridiculous. I've heard you say that before, and I'm like, what the hell?
well, I was tripping balls. I'm sorry. I mean, I shouldn't say that, but I have hallucinated. I have a moon square Neptune and it does hallucinate cyclically. But the thing is one of the things that's helped me immensely is learning to downstim through journaling, right? For example, before I had no way to, if I was just, in this state, I had no way to downstim, which is nervous system regulation. And what I learned in recovery was journaling, right? So it's like now if I get overstim, I just immediately journal and downstim. And like, I think there's this overwhelm of people who have maybe intense charts or things like that, where now, what do you think of the fact that there's cyclicality to these issues? And we know this as astrologers, right? Like you might have something in your chart that is schizophrenic kind of, or is ADD kind of, but it comes out cyclically. So yeah, we can talk about sleep and all these things, but what about the cyclicality of the transit side of
Well,
it?
see, that's the kind of, I mean, like psychiatric diagnosis is not cyclical. You know, if somebody is diagnosed with schizophrenia, they have schizophrenia and they are schizophrenic. You know, like that's sort of the way it's used. Like it's not like they were having hallucinations for this period. That would be like some kind of transient episode of psychosis. You wouldn't like qualify them as a diagnosis of schizophrenia. I haven't looked at the diagnostic criteria recently for schizophrenia, but like typically people who have schizophrenia, I mean, really have schizophrenia, they have like sometimes there's like a lot of negative symptoms. They have sort of a flattening, a bluntness, a blunting of their affect. They it's I don't think it's enough to have had hallucinations, to
Yeah.
be to qualify as it for a diagnosis of schizophrenia.
Well, you bring up one of the important points that you must deal with a lot in your kind of interdisciplinary work is that the labels given by psychology and psychiatry are static one-word labels. And astrology looks at a cyclical, fluctuating human with several aspects of personality. And so these labels that say like a person is PTSD or they are this or whatever, astrology knows in some ways so much more than that, that we are these aspects that are coming out on transits, and we're this more, and no two people with schizophrenia are ever the same, right? Because we know the charts are different. So how do you deal with that knowing both of those things and then dealing with clients who are coming in with these static labels? Like, how do you buck that, or what do you do with that?
Well, like if a person, like in my intake form, I'll say, like what diagnoses have you been given? And then I'll say, do you agree with them? Like, do they agree that, and sometimes they'll say, yes, I do. And then other times they'll say, no, I really don't, um, and they'll say some kind of extenuating circumstances that were going on that resulted in, like it's not uncommon for somebody to have taken, use some kind of substances and then have a psychosis. And so they have a psychosis that's substance induced, but if they weren't taking those substances, they wouldn't have had that. And I mean, sometimes it goes on to persist long after they've stopped using the substances, but um,
That's liberating in and of itself to say, what diagnosis has been given to you, and then do you agree with it? Because a diagnosis can be liberating. If somebody is kind of ADHD and they're in a relationship with somebody, and then finally they get a diagnosis, you're like, see, I'm ADHD, right? That liberates them from culpability in some way. But I think then it can become oppressive, or the person is being oppressed by a label. Then we need to be able to shirk those labels, and it seems like you kind of help people dance that line of like, does this label help or hinder you? And, you know,
yeah, I mean, the one condition that I've seen sort of repeatedly in my practice, besides, like people who have repeated episodes of mania, like not doing well if they don't take a mood stabilizer, is like certain people, they are just unable to function without a stimulant. They're so disorganized and they're so distracted and they're so sort of unmotivated and have such trouble getting things done. And like taking a stimulant can be just so transformative for them.
I mean, I think medical or giving pills to people is only detrimental in as much as that's seen as the only option. I mean, as an astrological remediation person, I think maybe we could all agree that some charts could use a pill. I mean, a pill is a remedy. It's not like you can't, it's not it just because we're astrologers doesn't mean that we exclude pills as
Right.
one form of remedy, right? I mean,
Right. Right. I mean, like I very much agree with you, but like if somebody calls me and said my psychiatrist retired and I need somebody to prescribe my stimulant for me, like I don't want to do that. That's like not interesting to me. I really want somebody, if I'm going to prescribe them, to be also doing all these other kinds of holistic practices, like including spiritual practice, to feel whole and healthy.
hmm, interesting. Jay-Z, would you take a pill for your sleep problems?
Oh, I would try not to. I would fix everything else first. but I'm definitely motivated as like a scientist of my own body. Like that is and maybe this too gets to identity, right? So I can change my identity pretty easily. Like if I realize that like smoking weed late into the night and then not getting enough sleep to be able to like function optimally in meetings the next day was detrimental to me, I can change my self-identity from the guy who stays up late at night smoking weed because that's cool to the guy who goes to bed at, 9:30 and gets up at 5:30 because that's cool because he's like a real good performer at work. Like, and I think that not everybody, maybe this is a little bit what we were saying before, Judy, about whether people will take their pills or not take their pills or make the lifestyle change to change their diet or not. Like, I think it ties to identity. What do you guys think?
When you say identity, like how are you using that? Like how they think of themselves, like or
Yeah,
how. Mhm.
yeah.
Well, I do think normie traditionalist people love to take pills. Like they're just like
And they
when I
don't want to change their diet. They don't want to stop drinking alcohol. They don't want to, get exercise. They don't want to, get up in the morning and get sunlight. Like that's like a lot of trouble.
yeah. Yeah, and I think there is a subset of people who's like, fix me, doc, kind of thing. Give me the pill and fix me. And it's like Judy is so much more along the lines of what like AR does is like watch your chart for 2 years, see what aspects you don't like, start making lists of things you do like on these, like it takes a lot of work, but in some ways, Judy's training people to be a spiritual master or a master of their self, instead of letting these things have their way with a person, which is so much more. I mean, not to judge any traditional people, but I think it's a super respectable way to handle things.
But so often people don't feel well with the medicines, like they have sexual dysfunction. It's super, super common with antidepressants. Some weight gain is really common. The anti-anxiety medicine, like it's a ball and chain for some people. Once they get on them and have taken them, they become dependent upon them. And the withdrawal syndrome for some people can be like the most hellish thing they've ever gone through.
Wow. That's such a good point. You're basically doing harm reduction for people who are having ill effects to meds. What a wonderful thing. I've never met a psychiatrist who does that. Um, so let's look at your book a little bit. So your first chapter is reclaiming a multidimensional way of being in the world. So talk to us a
That's
little
the
bit
heart
about.
of book. That's the heart of the book. That's the most important chapter of the book. It's the longest chapter. And like many patients, they come to see me and I say, "Do you have any spiritual practice?" And they said, "Well, I was raised Catholic, but I really don't, resonate with that anymore at all. And I wish I had some kind of spiritual practice, but I really don't know how to go about it." So I have like lots of ideas about how to help people with that. And like there was this cultural anthropologist named Angeles Arian who went around the world and studied different groups of people. She was interested in what were the commonalities between their spiritual practices in different cultures. And she identified three things that were common everywhere. And one was prayer. And for some people, you wouldn't want to say that word prayer because they feel very uncomfortable with it. Like it more could be like, asking for guidance um, or setting an intention. But to like cultures around the world, people like ask for help. Um, and then the second thing was gratitude. Like everywhere, people express gratitude for the blessings in their life. And the third thing was service, like doing things that increase the amount of like beauty and goodness in the world, things for other people. So, like, I'll talk with my patients about doing those three things. I mean, that already is like huge, just, to help them like feel like they can ask for help to something, to connect them with something bigger than themselves. Or like there's evidence-based studies on gratitude practices where, people who wrote down 5 things every night that they were grateful for, and then they took happiness scales, and then, 2 months later, they compared them with another group who didn't write down 5 things, and they are like measurably happier. Like it really does make a difference to pay attention to the good stuff. And then, acts of service are very uplifting for the person who does the service. And then I'll talk with patients about, like creating an altar in their home, like just some little corner of their room. It doesn't have to be a whole room, but like a place where just helps them remember that they're more than their physical body, um, and they can put, things that are meaningful to them there. And it's just reminding them of the soulful aspect of themselves. Um, and then I'll talk with patients about making offerings, um, like I talk, it depends how open a person is, but you know, like the way that I was trained to think is that the spirits like reciprocity. They don't like just to be asked, they also like to be thanked. And so, like, just take a handful of rice and say thank you for whatever the blessings are that you are thankful for. And I mean, astrology is also a spiritual practice. And very often patients will come to see me and they're very curious. I mean, especially these days, very curious about their birth charts, and they're really interested to look at that together.
So by multidimensional, in some ways, you mean spiritual, not just of one dimension, but you're
Not
looking.
just 3D, not just our physical body, not just our personality selves that is developed through life in the family.
Wow, that's fascinating. So you're kind of like a spiritual consultant meets psychiatrist, kind of.
Mhm.
That's beautiful. Jay-Z, are you writing down questions?
Yeah. Yeah, I was wondering if you could explain just like a little bit more about your thoughts about that astrology is a spiritual practice.
Mhm. Well, like I had this one astrology teacher who I loved, Emily Trinkus, and
I know
she,
Emily.
Emily?
Yeah, she did my first astrology reading ever.
Isn't she amazing?
Yeah, she is. She's a very humble. I think she's a Virgo. I don't know, but yeah.
She's a Virgo. We
Yeah.
have tons of synastry in our chart. I know her very well.
Okay.
I've had a lot to do with her. And anyhow, she once said this, and I put this in my book. I quoted her. I said, astrology is an apprenticeship to mystery. Like, I mean, how on earth does astrology work? None of us could really say anything compelling about the way that this works. And yet we observe so clearly that it does. And so clearly that everything is connected, that, our lives on earth, they're connected with these forces, beyond ourselves, universal forces in the heavens, like it just makes you a spiritual person to have the experience of the reality of the effectiveness of astrology.
It's true. Yeah, I mean, the astrology acts upon the spirit, within the spirit, alongside the spirit, all these kinds of things. It definitely is also hyper symbolic in that it gets people out of the mundane and into this more kind of global thinking, and just to kind of add on to what you're saying, I think. Yeah, okay. Jay-Z, do you have another question there?
No, no,
Did
go.
you have a reading with Emily in person in Portland?
I did. That was when I was in my early 20s. I mean, it was so long ago. How did you meet Emily?
It was so interesting. I was at a conference and there was a woman I was speaking with, and I thought, she is extremely well trained. She just has such a grasp of the archetypes. And I asked her who her teacher was, and she said it was Emily. So then I started to investigate.
Interesting. Yeah. Yeah, Emily is like really well known for being kind of not that well known, if that makes sense.
She is totally not interested in the limelight.
Yeah, yeah, but she does a very
She
good.
has a podcast now, it's very kind of Aquarian. It's called the Embodied Aquarian Podcast. And
Right,
she interviews very unusual guests.
nice. Okay, well, I'm very curious about your take on food as medicine. That's a whole chapter in here. You
That
mentioned
is
it earlier.
so important. That is so important. I mean, People are different. I mean, some people seem to have more tolerance for eating poorly than other people. But for certain people, it's nothing short of miraculous when they change their diet. Like people who have food sensitivities, like if they identify that, when they eat dairy, they feel depressed, or when they eat gluten, that their sleep gets disturbed, or um, that, eggs make them feel irritable and angry. Um, I mean, for certain people, food causes a lot of, I mean, for more than other people, food causes a lot of inflammation in the body and the brain. But for everybody, like the American diet is so, it's called the standard American diet sad, like it's like so little attention paid to um, quality of freshness, like if like standard nutrition, it's just like what are the macronutrients, how many calories is it, nothing about like the vitality of food, the freshness of food, like the seasonality of food. I mean, it's same like we were talking before, like nutritionists, they won't say like what's a diet to eat in summer or what's a diet to eat in winter. It's just what's the diet, And many people are metabolically deranged and they just eat way, way, way too many carbohydrates, and it causes them to have insulin resistance and inflammation and to feel tired and not to have good energy. And you can do so much for people if you help them figure out like a diet that is good for them. I mean, like amazing.
Well, plus ultra processed foods. I mean, it's like you were saying, if you're just counting the macronutrients, but all of your food is engineered,
Right,
there,
comes in a
like you're saying,
box,
there's no life in it.
there's
Yeah.
no life in it. Like how long ago was that wheat in that cereal in the ground growing? Like what did it go through to, and I mean, so many people, they just eat processed and packaged foods. It's certainly convenient and, engineered to be like especially tasty. And
Just building on this, so when reading the ancient Greek books about astrology, they had this whole theory that each of us should feed our own house uniquely. So just taking it to another level of with the astrology layer is, for example, if a chart is super fiery, they might say that it needs protein or meat protein because it's very muscular. And I think there's this idea that some people think everyone should be able to be vegetarian, but what astrologer would say is like, no, some charts need meat in order to function very well. Then we have charts that are 10 planets in Earth and carry a lot of weight around. And so then we have to deal with, what does that chart actually need for food? And then what can we tweak for the food, kind of thing. So I think, super
one
very,
size fits all.
what is it?
It's not one size fits all. Oh.
Right. Well, that's what and that's why Hippocrates, said like a doctor is not an astrologer but a fool, because it really, medicine being individualized is when medicine goes to another level. So I'm sure, you do this with your clients since you look at their charts and things. It's like you're looking at each one and what is the case, and you also have to look at the case of what are they already eating, how is that affecting their behavior, how's so it's like yeah, I think that's a thing in astrological remediation as well, as like food is medicine. And now, I mean, do you believe that anyone can be healed with like superfoods like miso and things like that?
We put these questions in this like hyperbolic way that you could never answer yes to them. Like, could anyone be healed? Everyone. Um, but no, I mean, I don't think it's just food. It's also like nervous system regulation. Like that is the most fundamental thing is learning to calm down your nervous system. Um, because people who have like their nervous system is like totally wound up, but they're in a constant state of fight or flight. They'll eat like a healthy food and they'll have a terrible reaction to it. Like they're just reacting to everything because their body is on like danger, danger, Um, so like calmness is like the most foundational thing. Um, but
Yeah.
How does one regulate their nervous system? Tell us.
Well, like there's different kinds of practices, like, and what I usually do is that I recommend this program that a person works with that they can become a member of this platform that's called Primal Trust. And it's like so skillfully designed and constructed and set up. But like there'll be different practices like brain retraining practice. Like there's one that's called pattern interrupt. So let's say you know, like there's some thought that you just keep returning to in this kind of ruminative way. Like you're like, oh my God, like I'm really afraid that, like my cholesterol is so high, I'm going to have like a heart attack, or I don't know, whatever it is, like some kind of thought, some kind of fearful thought, often like health related, but it doesn't have to be. It can be like, oh, like I feel so bad about my relationship with so and so, or whatever it is that you just, you keep your mind keeps going down that groove. So, like, you catch yourself, you say, oh, here I am doing that. What is that? What is that thought? Um, how does that thought make me feel? It makes me feel sad. It makes me feel worried. So then you identify it, you say how it makes you feel, and then you say, stop it. And then you like look around and you say, oh, the light on the leaves are so beautiful, or, the cat is so soft, like you tune into something else, and you breathe. And you might have to do it like 25, 50 times a day because you're constantly, but you interrupt it, but it's like training a puppy. You keep doing it like again and again, and you get a hold of your mind. So that's like one thing. And then there's other things, like that's like sort of top down. There's stuff that's like bottom up, like the vagus nerve is very much responsible for like the parasympathetic nervous system. Like most of us are in a state of chronic fight or flight and we don't even recognize it because we're so accustomed to it and habituated to it. But there's so much fear and uncertainty and insanity in our world that, we're all jacked up. And so the vagus nerve is the parasympathetic that is the antidote to fight or flight. It's the rest and digest. So there's practices like eye yoga, like you can follow your finger like in a figure eight. Like you can like look at something close up and then look far away and look close up and look far away. Or you can hum or you can gargle. All of these things stimulate the vagus nerve and that like calms down your body. I mean, it sounds very simple and it is really very simple, but it requires kind of consistent practice, but it really does calm down the nervous system.
Oh, that's interesting. It's interesting how so many of these things that you're talking about, like the whole eating seasonally and people having different patterns of eating depending on their chart of like what's good for them or not. That is just like really reminds me of Ayurveda
Oh yeah,
the
totally.
doshas
Totally.
and now when you're talking about like these exercises or like even humming like there are like yogic practices
Chanting, you know?
specifically yeah like
Yeah,
that
totally.
it's reminding me of how at the beginning you were talking about how there are universal practices of health and healing in every culture
Yes.
and
Yeah.
what you're saying is reminding me of like these other ones from other cultures, and maybe we, as Americans, do you think are not as grounded because we're not as old of a country, or we don't have like why don't we have
But we
these?
don't have any sense of the innate healing capacity of the body or that we can do anything for ourselves. We're just like supposed to take a pill, or we're supposed to have a procedure, and like all of those things require that you do something yourself for yourself. A lot of like breathing practices are incredibly powerful and yogic. Um,
Does it have to do with the fact that insurance covers
Oh,
certain things?
I think it's a lot of it is money driven. I think like, like Like now there's been a lot of attention paid to the overprescription of medicines and opioids. But like when I think I was like in medical school, like I remember having this lecture that was like we were being told that it was kind of puritanical and wrong to withhold pain medicine from patients, you know? And I think there was a big drive from like the pharmaceutical companies to get doctors to prescribe pain meds, and then people would become completely addicted to them. And, like the fact that, like they constantly lower the bar, like they constantly say, oh, if your cholesterol number is this, then you should be on statins. And they constantly lower it. And like if a clinician doesn't offer a patient a statin and document that they've offered it, then they don't get reimbursed by insurance. Like the whole like pharmaceutical industry is interwoven with the insurance industry and dictates care. And on top of it, I mean, doctors have no time to be thoughtful. They have like 15-minute appointments with people. And very often they don't have like continuity of care. Like the person sees whatever practitioner is like happens to be there for them to see for 15 minutes. It's not like, developing a relationship with someone. I mean, the relationship is such a huge component of healing. And I mean, I think like in an astrology reading, you can give like good info, but if you deliver it in such a way that it's not, you're connecting with the person in a way that makes them feel seen and heard and understood and held, like that's not going to be a good reading.
All such good points. Well, we could listen to you for now. I'm sorry I hyperbolized. Okay. But I am really interested in the next chapter. This book is like so rad. Okay. Breaking away from energy vampires. So tell us about this.
Well, I mean, it's not rocket science either, like when people are in toxic relationships, when they're in a relationship where they don't feel treated in a loving way, when they feel like a lack of care or a lack of consideration, or like it's like a one-way street where it's all about one person's needs and not about the other person's needs, and the one person is in service to the other person, but isn't really being treated with any kind of loving way. It's incredibly stressful. It's toxic. I mean, it doesn't have to be just a partnership. It can be like a work situation. Then we're like activated and we're in a stress state and we have cortisol and fight or flight, and then we have inflammation. And you can have the most thoughtful, sophisticated supplement regimen and, best diet. But if you're in a relationship where, it's abusive, you're not going to be able to heal. So that's what that's about.
I so believe that. Like, I just, even being married to somebody where you have a bad composite chart, I mean, just to be an astrological extremist about it, or you have really hard synastries or something like that, I think that makes people sick.
Yes.
So if you get with somebody where you have a good composite chart and your energies ultimately, your pheromones ultimately heal each other, you live longer. They say happily married couples live longer than single people, but unhappily married people die early, I think. And I absolutely agree
I
with.
mean, I think it's so stressful to, be in a relationship where there's conflict and anger and, and in any kind of like regular basis, it's not good for our nervous systems.
Yeah, Jay-Z and I have been dealing with that this week. He thinks that I should walk away when conflict happens, and I just like to stay and fight. No, I'm just kidding. It depends. It depends. It
Yeah,
depends
it
on the
depends
health of the composite.
well, and it depends if the conflict is like a game that two people are playing or it's not, you know?
Well, I think an energy vampire, I'm just curious as to what the definition of that is. Is like, is that somebody who sucks your energy, or is
Somebody
that
who drains you, somebody who like thinks that um well, this is not language that I really like because it feels like victim blaming, but I remember having a supervisor during my training saying The marriage between a narcissist and a masochist is a marriage made in heaven because the narcissist thinks they deserve everything, the masochist thinks they deserve nothing. So, like, there are relationships that are very not mutual, and that one person is really kind of feeding off the energy and of the goodwill of the other. And, the other person is doing that for their own reasons, most often related to at least, at least in this lifetime, reenacting something from what was going on in their childhood home. But, you know,
Yeah, in the Seven Habits of Highly Effective People, which I would assume are healthy people, there's a whole chapter on win-win or no deal. So if
uh,
both people aren't winning from an equation, like you're supposed to walk away, like no matter
yeah,
what,
yeah, that makes sense to me.
So I feel like you're kind of talking about win-lose situations where one person is getting a lot from the relationship and the other person is losing a lot. And in that case, that person needs to break away because
Yeah, I mean, I've seen cases where, a person was involved with somebody who was very kind of dominating and cruel and sadistic, and they were dancing as fast as they could to try to appease the person and get them to be loving. And meanwhile, they're like getting sicker and sicker with like fibromyalgia and chronic pain. And, when finally the relationship ended, the person, you know, started seeing another woman and they divorced. That woman who had the fibromyalgia went on to be like running triathlons or marathons, like she was like so like depleted and destroyed by being treated like that.
Well, I guess the tricky thing is in that situation, like you don't know. It's hard to have perspective, especially if you're because I can imagine, and I've been this way in certain circumstances in my life that I'm like, well, is this bad? Like, or is this just a rough patch? Or is this unfair? Or,
I
well,
think I
they
think I
think it's
think that's
unfair too.
I
Like,
think, like that's what I've observed like in abusive relationships. Like it's like for at least in some, like it's only when a person like finally believes that there's nothing that they're going to be able to do to get the other person to change. There's nothing, there's no amount of therapy, there's no amount of, modification of their own behavior of appeasement that's going to get the person to treat them in a loving, caring, appropriate manner that they're finally able to leave. Because as long as they keep hoping that they're going to be able to figure something out, which is often like a way of avoiding just being really sad and grief stricken about the whole thing. That it's only when they accept that this is not going to change that they can get out of it.
Mhm. One of the interesting byproducts of being in recovery is like they say they call it getting clean. Well, over the years, like my heart has become cleaner and cleaner. Like, and that's because you clear out resentments and you clear out like all this emotional garbage too. Well, it's really weird because now if something sucks my energy, I can feel it like immediately because I am clean, basically, right? So it's like I have serenity. I'm living at this baseline of happiness. Right. So as soon as something happens like that, I'm like, oh no, oh like, and I'm like clearing psychic cords and I'm just like, get it off of me, back to serenity. Like, but I think that's interesting if we all became really sensitive culturally to what makes us feel unclean or tethered, or, I wonder if we could train people to get less bogged down in relationships. I mean, that would require a whole cultural shift. I don't know that we really talk about these things. I mean, psychics talk about them, like having your cords cleared and, being too corded to something. I think this is a really fascinating thing you've included here because you're basically saying that a relationship can make you crazy.
And sick, like totally sick.
Yeah. Yeah. It's funny how your schizophrenia goes away when you leave your baby daddy. No, I'm just kidding.
It
Kidding,
goes
not
away
kidding.
when you do what?
When you leave your baby daddy. Kidding, not kidding. Okay. All right. Let's go down to weaning from medications. Okay.
Mhm.
So I'm curious as to your process. Like, do you have kind
I
of
have, I have a,
formulate.
I have a, yeah, I have a way, like somebody wants me to help them get off of like benzos. Like that's a big commitment, for me to help them with that. And like, I don't want to take over prescribing until I see that they are really motivated. Because sometimes a person will say they are motivated, but then, yeah, not so much, like they're not changing their diet, they're not doing the nervous system regulation practices. So like I ask them to um, start doing all of the lifestyle changes that we've been talking about before I'm willing to take over prescription. Because it's a big responsibility to prescribe, and like these controlled substances, you can't just like do refills every month. You have to call in, place a new order. And I don't want to be stuck with that if I don't have like a real co-creative partnership, collaboration with someone. And so then, when I do take over prescribing, like the conventional way that it is done is just way too fast. And it causes for some people, tremendous withdrawal syndromes and makes them feel like horrible. So, like, basically, I do 10% a month, but if a person is feeling like they're having, it's too much, then we'll go 5%. If they're feeling unstable, we won't drop it for a month. I mean, it can take like a year or two to get off of these medicines because we do it so slowly. And all the while, they're doing all of these lifestyle things to support them to be able to be successful at withdrawing. But it's not for the faint-hearted for them to do it or for me. It's a big deal.
Brilliant, honestly. Like what you do is so amazing. Yeah, I think yeah, because if you do it too quickly, then they don't get trained in all of the other things that you're teaching them fast enough.
It's also it's like they're not going to be as successful because, if they calm down their nervous system, they're going to tolerate the, withdrawing the medicine. The nervous system gets, and for some people gets really, altered by the drugs, and they have a really hard time getting off of them. They have like withdrawal syndromes. I mean, some of my patients are so exquisitely sensitive. The smallest drop, like they feel it, and they have a headache or they feel out of sorts or it's just not good.
Mhm. Yeah.
I've witnessed people trying to get off of the especially the sleeping one that begins with the letter T. Like, and their whole thing of like, oh, well, I'm trying to get down by a half, and they struggle and struggle by to get down a half a pill, like
Yeah,
from
see, half
one
is
pill
already a
to
lot. Like
yeah,
I'll get the medicine compounded. Like there's compounding pharmacies. So like let's say they're on 1 milligram of Klonopin. Well, the next dose for the next month would be zero point 0.9. That doesn't come in zero point 0.9 at the Walgreens or
yeah.
CVS. You need to get it compounded.
Oh, that is fascinating. Yeah, because I feel like everyone needs a Judy. Like there's only one Judy. That's such a bummer. I you must be quite busy, honestly.
Well, like I'm not, like, but I'm busy as I want to be because I don't take a lot of patients on. Like I like at this point in my career, um I have like a lot of creative projects that I'm interested in doing, and I don't want to be like working that much, and I don't want to be working with patients that like don't interest me that much. Like I really want to be working with people who I want to be working with. And so like, like I'm cutting back further because I'm working on creating an oracle deck to go with my book. And so I want to have time to do that. And so like
Judy's art is bananas, by the way.
I'm working like 2.5 days a week.
Yeah.
And then when I work, like I see 4 or 5 patients in a day, not more than that. Yeah.
Interesting. Um, do you have anything else on your list, Jesse? There's a few more chapters in here.
No, no, go for it. Well, actually, I do have one more question. From something that you said before, Judy, a couple times, like the whole flight or fight thing, right?
Mhm.
And the
Mhm.
vagus nerve, and then like when cortisol is pumping
Yep. Yep.
through. I hadn't heard until like about a year ago the whole fight. It's not just fight or flight, it's fight, flight, freeze, or fawn.
Yes,
That
yes,
was like a mind-blowing revelation to me,
yeah,
these other two.
yes, yes, yes.
You think about that and about how it's
That's, I
like
mean, in nature, that's the case, like, well, I mean, and it's not just, I mean, in nature, you can see it with like, wild animals or whatever that, they'll just like freeze when they're being like attacked. But, like I've seen it, like in a couples therapy where like somebody is just like really, being attacking and the other person is just kind of like wide-eyed, kind of like frozen as they're like in a state of freeze. And the fawning thing is super observable, like people who just flatter the other person and just try to ingratiate themselves and have such a hard time, like asserting themselves. They're just like trying to keep themselves safe by like appeasing and being pleasant, and it's quite painful.
do you think that these things are different ways that people who have different charts manifest their cortisol reactions?
Well, probably that's true. Like you would imagine that, you know, somebody who had a lot of like martial energy in their chart, a lot of Aries or um, maybe a lot of Scorpio, that they would be, more likely to be like in a fighting thing, or somebody who, maybe had more Libra, that they might be more prone to fawning or, like,
Yeah.
yeah, for sure.
All right, good question. So, okay, the next, well, okay, I can't decide here. Let's go to Chiron because you have a chapter called Lions, Chiron, and Healing. So,
Mhm.
what's up with Chiron for you in this whole process?
Well, Chiron is big. I mean, if on the cover of the book, that constellation on the front of the cover is Chiron. Um,
Oh, wow.
yep. And like like my Chiron return was like a big turning point for me in my life. Like it was at that point where I was like 49 and both my parents died within like 3 months of each other. And my marriage ended, and I was married to somebody abusive, and I had three little children. And it was just like I was just like putting one foot in front of the other and just trying to like survive. And I consulted an astrologer for the first time at that point. And it's not quite as odd as it might sound, given that I was a psychiatrist and psychoanalyst, because my dad was really interested in astrology, but he was like in the closet about it. And so I was like so blown away by my conversation with the astrologer that I went back to see her again and again to look at the charts of my children and at everybody in my life. And finally, I was like, I need to learn to do this myself. So that was when I went and started studying with Stephen Forrest and did his whole apprenticeship program, and then started studying with Maurice Fernandez. And it was from that point that I started adding these different holistic modalities to my practice. Like I did a training in shamanism, and I did training in functional medicine, and I did a training in energy healing, and like one thing after another, and started morphing my practice. And I noticed that, and it was like the whole, like everything that I went through at that time, like it was really hard, like a very difficult divorce and vindictive, partner. And it all really led to me like empowering myself. And I see this a lot in my practice, that people will show up when they're like 49, 50, and they're just like, there's some kind of internal um, impulse to heal something that is like some sort of essential wounding. And there's also at that time, like for women, it's at the time of transition of, you know, menopause, and which is like a huge biological shift. But for everybody, sort of mortality comes into view, and there's this um, impulse to like spiritualize the life. That's my experience. And so, and you know, one of the ideas in the book, and it's, not unique to my book or my thinking, is that, it's like through our suffering, that we grow and change and develop. And it's like also through like being able to make use of that to be of service and help to others that like we can, transform those lemons into lemonade and, turn it into like a blessing.
Yeah, the Chiron return, I can see where that would be like a big time of healing wounds and kind of moving forward, which is a lot of the work that you do with people. So, okay, that's fascinating. All right. Well, we got 3 minutes, so I'm just going to be thorough here. Let's talk mold toxicity.
Oh gosh. Like there's three conditions that I talk about in the book that are very common that they're not recognized by conventional medicine. One of them is mold toxicity. Another one is mast cell activation, which is a condition that affects the white cells of the immune system. And the third one is Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, which is a connective tissue disorder. And all three of these conditions, very often, the person feels really anxious, they have trouble concentrating, they may be depressed, they have symptoms that affect multiple organ systems, and it doesn't fit any kind of known pattern, and they'll run from one medical practitioner to another, and they'll get frustrated. There's something wrong, and nobody can find anything what's wrong because they're not looking for the right thing. And so then they'll get referred to a psychiatrist, and it's so invalidating, because there really is something wrong. There's like a medical problem going on. And so like in my intake paperwork, I have like a questionnaire about Ehlers-Danlos syndrome, like to identify if they do have connective tissue disorder, because you can't cure it, but it's very helpful to understand that all of these different things that they're experiencing may be related to that. And like for mast cell activation and mold, there is like specific treatment that is very helpful. And the treatment is not an antidepressant or an anti-anxiety medicine. It's, like helping them with their histamine and detoxing from the mold.
Yeah, this is such a wonderful hour. I mean, thank you so much because I know we've met you several times, but we never really got to hear you tell us your expertise. And so this was just, I think, just super fruitful for us as a crew. And
Well, I appreciate the opportunity to talk about my work, and also I love all of your like different offerings. I just love all these different people that you interview and all the whole wide range of things that you explore and culture and race, and just it's very inspiring to me.
thank you, Judy. Well, we adore you so much. All right, everyone, get Sacred Psychiatry. This book is very, very good and very useful. And thank you all both for being here. We'll see you soon.
Thanks.
Thanks.
Bye.